Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar about Everyone Communicates, Tips, Guidance, Tricks for Using the POM. I'm Seth Petrie, Director of Marketing for CQL. I'm going to be covering a few housekeeping items before I hand things over to our presenters today. First off, we just want to thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it. So to get us started, all attendees are in listen-only mode, so you won't be able to speak out loud during the webinar, but you can communicate with us using the Q&A box. Please note that we've turned off the chat box for attendees. We will be using the chat box to send out relevant links, information, tools, resources throughout the presentation. But again, if you have any questions for us, please use the Q&A box. We will try to devote some time at the end of today's webinar, maybe roughly 10 to 15 minutes for any kind of questions. And if not, we can always follow up with you individually. We have enabled Zoom's built-in live transcription closed captioning service. To turn that on Zoom, you go to your Zoom control window and click the little live transcript closed captioning button. This webinar is being recorded, and as usual, what we'll be doing is in about 1 week's time, we will send an email to all registrants, whether you actually attended live or not. We will send you a link to where you can access both the webinar recording as well as a PDF version of the PowerPoint slide. So you can expect that in roughly 1 to 2 weeks. So now I'm going to be handing things over to our presenters today. We have Rebecca Casey with us, Director of Special Projects, and Michael Clausen, Director of Personal Outcomes. Thank you very much. And Michael, Rebecca, let me take it from here.
Great. Thanks, Seth. Okay, Michael and I are super excited to talk about the tips and tricks and guidance when you're using the personal outcome measures as a tool and really focusing on the way that people communicate. So with that, we're going to first start out and just talk about our vision and mission at CQL. So our vision is a world of dignity, opportunity, and community for all people. Our mission is that we're dedicated to the definition, measurement, and improvement of personal quality of life. And personal outcome measures really focus on that personal quality of life. There are a couple of things that we do at CQL, and you're participating in one of those. So you are participating in the training aspect of what we do. We also provide accreditation services, and we provide network accreditation for different networks, state networks, also some of the other managed care entities. We also do accreditation for organizations. There are a ton of training opportunities at CQL, and you can actually go and look on our website and find all of the trainings that are offered. Some of them are free, like this webinar today, and some of them might be paid. A lot of the training that we offer is really open to many people because we want to share a lot of the good information we know that CQL can share. Certification is another area. Some people on this webinar might be certified in personal outcome measures. We also do certification with something called the basic assurances. So if you want to learn more about certification, you can certainly check out our website. We also do a ton of research and data analysis. And that is something that we love to have freely available to our partners, to people just going to our website. You can access all of our research articles that our analyst does, Dr. Carly Friedman, and you can access all of those for free so that you can really look at the research that is coming out, especially about personal outcomes. And then we do consultation. We do consultation with organizations, state governments, and a whole bunch of different places. So with that, with consultation, we like to engage people where they are and really talk about ways that they can improve personal quality of life. Okay. So a big part of our history, and this is really focused on personal outcome measures. So we also have a nice video, a CQL history video that goes through all of the other ways that we have really focused on best practices and really steered things that they are doing in the state and federal government to really focus on things. So please feel free to click that link later and see that about us, and then you'll also be able to take a look at the history. But as you can see, in 1991 and 1992, CQL really embarked on talking to people with focus groups. We wanted to talk to people supported, people who were parents or guardians of somebody that is supported, and thought leaders in the community. And we wanted to start doing that so that we could learn more about what personal outcome measures are most important to people. So then we started piloting that in 3 organizations, and then we field tested it across the United States and Canada as a tool. So the personal outcome measures as a tool was field tested. And in 1993, it ended up creating 30 total outcomes. Validity ended up happening and the testing was conducted. And when that testing was conducted in 1997, we dropped down to 25 outcomes. And in 2005, we're at the 21 outcomes that most of you know today. So the analysis of data really showed us that there were a lot of outcomes that could be combined and might have been duplicative. And so now we're at those 21 outcomes. And then in 2017, we took a look at that and revalidated to make sure that all of the information that the personal outcome measures is giving us is validated. And we're looking at the data for that and making sure that it's reliable. So with our history of personal outcome measures, it doesn't end there. You see an arrow, you know that we're continuing to look at best practices for it and continue to really improve with it. The general categories that we have within the personal outcome measures, a lot of people on this call will be familiar with. We have my human security, those non-negotiable areas for people. We have my community, and that's going to be really focused on how people are accessing and participating in their communities. My relationships, that's natural supports, those intimate relationships, all of those areas where we build relationships across the community. My choices, really about choosing where you live, choosing where you work, choosing your services. And then my goals, which I always say is my favorite one because we get to hear about people's goals for their life, the future, and how they've achieved them. So it's a really awesome experience if you've ever been involved in those personal outcome measures before, and I'm certain many of you have. So when we are talking about everyone communicating, the big objective here, because we are asked often about how best to communicate with people who may communicate differently and not always communicate verbally. So really the objectives here are first to recognize those different forms of communication that are available. We want to explain those to begin with because it's really important that we look at that holistically. We also want to make sure that we're developing those active listening skills. Active listening is incredibly important, and we'll actually do a Q&A box about active listening later. We want to utilize our observations. Observations are key. We, within this field, really focus on those observations of people, what they enjoy doing, their life, how they want to be a part of the community. All of these observations are key. We want to also talk about how you use the personal outcome measures with people who use forms of communication that is different from your own. And that's incredibly important. I know many of you are here today to really get down to the meat of that. And then we get to explore data. As you know, CQL is very, very committed to the definition and defining data. And then we pulled a lot of suggestions from our certified personal outcome measure interviewers and decided to present them here today to really show all of the ways that people who have been doing interviews have found different ways to communicate. As we start, one of the things that we like to do is just bring up a note on language. Language is incredibly important. And, you know, it's not just because you want to be politically correct. It's about being polite. It is about making sure that we are showing common courtesy to people. So it isn't just about the fact that people say, oh, don't, you know, it's all about political correctness. And it's not. It's about really respecting somebody. So you'll see that we do not like to use terms like nonverbal. We would rather use terms like this person doesn't use words to communicate. This person uses an assistive device to communicate. This person communicates differently than I do. We don't want to use that term nonverbal. We don't like putting the term high functioning or low functioning because really when we're focusing on that, we're not focusing on people's strengths, we're focusing on that deficit. So when we look at high functioning, you'll hear people say, no, we're talking about somebody who has great skills and talent, who might need less support. We won't use low functioning. We'll talk about people who might need more support. There's terms like wheelchair bound. We don't like using that. Again, a wheelchair isn't something you're bound to. It's actually something that really creates your opportunity to transport and be within the community. So you use a wheelchair. Having a behavior, that is something that we don't use because we all have behaviors, right? I'm showing a behavior right now. So what we like to say is it's people who need individualized support. And really, what are those supports? So what kind of supports are we looking at? We don't like to use the term CP or other types of abbreviations for disabilities. We would rather say a person who has cerebral palsy or a physical disability. And we really do not like using the term a client or consumer or customer or anything that you've heard in the past. It's a person who receives services, just a person. So this is just a quick note on language, because it's just incredibly important that we all come together on the same page about language. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, such an important message about language. And it's really, really fascinating to think about all of the different ways that we communicate as human beings. There are lots of different types of communication. So we really wanted to start with that and explore some of those ways that people communicate. So communication really is a two-way street. We communicate outwardly, and we are listening to what others are communicating to us. So we put that into two separate categories: expressive language, when we share our wants, our needs, our thoughts, our ideas, our goals, our dreams, and then the receptive language, when we listen and gain understanding. And within expressive language, there are four primary categories. So verbal communication, nonverbal communication, augmentative communication, and assistive technology and devices. Now, and just to reiterate what Rebecca had mentioned earlier about this term nonverbal, so this is a reference to a type of communication. This is not a label that we would put on people, right? We don't refer to people as nonverbal, and instead we would say, how does that person communicate? It's a person who communicates with an assistive technology or device, or a person who communicates with sign language. So again, a special note about this term nonverbal, we don't ever want that to be a label for people. Okay, I think that's really important. So this is really fascinating. In doing some research, I actually didn't know this. I knew that there was a lot, but I didn't know that there was this many. There are currently 7,168 languages on Earth, according to ethnologue.com. So just really, really fascinating. So lots of different languages. And again, just to kind of show all the variability within communication that we use as human beings. And even within that verbal communication, there is a lot of nuance. So even when we are using our words and speaking the same language, the expression and perception of what is being expressed is highly nuanced. The way that our outward communication is perceived can be highly variable based upon our tone, pitch, and volume. The words that we emphasize and the way that we say something can have a huge impact upon the meaning of what we are expressing and how it is perceived by those that we are communicating with. For example, sarcasm, that is often expressed through the emphasis of certain words and the tone that we use. So if I say, "You are a really great listener," that is going to be perceived much differently than if I said, you are a really great listener. So again, that nuance, that tone, those little differences can have a big difference in how we are communicating and how that's going to be perceived by others. So a little bit about nonverbal communication. Again, lots of different types of nonverbal communication. So sign language, written or typed communication, eye contact can have an impact. So braille, facial expressions, gestures, the way that you position your body when you are communicating, that can have a big impact as well. And within the category of augmentative communication, we typically include symbols and pictures. It could be an object of reference. So if you point to an object, signs, there are also human aids to communication that can include interpreters, translators, or note takers. And there is lots of technology that helps us to communicate as well. We're actually using some of that today. So that's kind of neat. Some of that technology can include devices to enable someone to use speech, devices that support people to hear, devices for people with visual impairments, and other safety-related devices. So when you think about safety-related devices, that could include flashing smoke alarms, equipment with some kind of audible or other signal that lets you know that there is an emergency. So it's possible to use the personal outcome measures with all people. And that's really the point that we're trying to make today. As interviewers, as those of us who use the personal outcome measures, it is important to identify how people communicate and make sure that the support needed to communicate is readily available during that conversation. So again, that could mean a device, it might mean an interpreter, it might mean some kind of adaptation. Oftentimes, it's going to be a combination of a variety of different communication techniques. So the most important thing here is that everyone communicates, okay? Everyone communicates. Some people might communicate differently than you and I, but everyone communicates. And again, as personal outcome measures interviewers, it's up to us to find out how do people communicate and what is going to be the best way to truly understand that communication. So again, we can use this with all communication forms. Sometimes we might need a little bit of help from others, interpreters. We may need to get some support from a device. But as those of us using the personal outcome measures, it's important that we adapt to people's chosen communication methods. We do consider that to be an essential skill in interview.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to have all of you use the Q&A box, and Mike is going to read out some of those answers. But what we would like you to do before we go a little bit further into this art of listening is to let us know what is active listening. How do you show that you are actively listening when someone is speaking or communicating? Go ahead and answer.
Okay, we have a lot of really great responses coming in here. We have a really skilled group with us today. So somebody mentioned eye contact, nodding, stopping what you are doing, giving a nod and repeating back what people say, looking at the person. Yeah, a lot of eye contact, no distractions and phone off. Yeah. Nodding, making eye contact, smiling. That's a really good one. Asking a follow-up question. Leaning forward. These are really good. Nodding, wait until the person is finished speaking and ask questions. Being present. Great. Wow, these are really, really good. Respond to people's questions and at times relay what you heard back to the person. Yeah, great. Okay, we'll do a couple more. Looking at the person, paraphrasing, and repeating back to make sure that you heard them correctly. So yeah, nice job. Wow, great group.
Very nice job. I also like to repeat back to the person what was said, and also don't think about the next question, really be in the moment. I like that a lot. Okay, wonderful. So we can be done because you guys are all experts, right? So, okay. We'll move on just with the art of listening and talk a little bit about how everyone is communicating and why listening is important. And you wrote a lot of these, right? Give your undivided attention during personal outcome measure interviews, regardless of the way that somebody communicates. Again, we all actually communicate in ways where we might have nonverbal communication and maybe we have verbal communication. We might also use devices. So we use a plethora of those tools in everyday life for all of us. And that is true too with when you're doing a personal outcome measure interview, and you want to give your attention to all of those. Always take the time to listen. It is incredibly important that we wait for people to bring up or answer a question. And this is true regardless of whether you're doing a personal outcome measure interview or just talking to somebody. You need to take the time to listen to the answer that somebody gives you. And people might need to take time to really think about how they want to answer. I know there are some of us who immediately will answer. We want to immediately answer something. We listen to the question and it pops right out. But we need to make sure that we are being mindful of how we communicate with the person, taking that time, giving undivided attention, all of the things that people are writing below. Those are all ways they're showing the art of listening. If you're doing that, you do show respect to the person. So what are some of the strategies for communications that we have? We have basically two different types of questions that can be asked. Those are open and closed questions. So open questions are questions that have to be answered with an explanation or an opinion. So this is really useful when you start a discussion to start learning about a person's unique perspective. So tell me about your life. Tell me about yourself. Really open-ended, right? We're not saying, do you like where you live? Yes or no. We're asking you very specifically, tell me about yourself. Tell me about how you made these choices, rather than just asking if somebody made a choice. Those are incredibly important to gather information, but also to make people really comfortable with providing answers to. That's the way we typically communicate, right? You don't typically ask people yes and no questions over and over. We ask very open-ended questions. Closed-ended questions are really about answering with that specific response, that yes and no, giving people an option and saying, is this too much, too little, or just enough? These are things that have that one answer that we're looking for. This is really useful for being able to clarify what somebody says. So if you're saying, tell me about yourself, and the person says, I live with my brother and I really enjoy it. He is my best friend and I want to live with him forever. Then maybe I end that with a closed-ended question of, you said that you like living with your brother, is that correct? Yes or no, right? So I'm closing it to clarify what the person said and also to summarize a lot of what people have said before. So when you're closing out that conversation, always remember we start with that open-ended and we just clarify with the closed-ended question. And this seems really simple, and it's not always simple, right? We like to ask yes and no questions, but it really creates a depth to the interview. The art of listening is incredibly important when you use questions in conversations. You want to ask what or how questions. We want to avoid the why. So what do you like to do when you go out? not why do you go to the movies, right? We want to know what you like to do. How do you want your future to look like? And how would you like it to look in the future? How would you like your life to change in the future? We're really asking these questions that help bring broader concepts so that we can really listen to what people want. Be patient, wait for that response. So a big part of this too is that for a lot of people, regardless of whether you have a disability or not, you might take time to really want to answer a question, to form your thoughts, to be able to respond. So when you do ask a question, wait for a response from someone. If you need to change the way you ask the question, you can certainly do that, but we want to wait first to see if the way you asked it the first time, somebody just needs a little bit of time to think about. Guide the person to identify the problem. You don't want to say, do you think the problem is where you live? You want to say, what do you think the problem is here? If somebody is bringing things up. We don't want to form someone's opinion. We really, in a personal outcome measure interview, want to know about what that person thinks, desires, wants, their hopes and dreams. And with that, this is listening without judging. We all come in with preconceived ideas and notions about the way the world should be or our own set of values and beliefs. But this is about what the person wants, so you listen without that judgment. We really want to hear about the person's life and what they'd like to see in the future and what they're happy about now and what they may want to see change. So all of that has to be approached in a really non-judgmental manner because somebody has to feel comfortable to be able to really respond to you. And we know that when somebody's judging you, none of us are comfortable in that situation. So with this, we actually have a lot of questions listed here that are really meant to help you when you're doing personal outcome measure interviews, but also when you're just providing support. So I always say that the personal outcome measure questions make you much better at providing support because you just always are asking how people feel about things. So what do you make of your staff? What do you make of your day and your schedule? How do you feel about your day program? How do you feel about where you work? What concerns you most about your housemates? What concerns you most about your neighborhood? When people are bringing up concerns, we just want to ask what is the most concerning part about that? Because, you know, people do have concerns about a variety of things in their life. What seems to be the obstacle? What are we trying to overcome? So if somebody isn't doing something that they would like to be doing, what's getting in the way? You know, how do they perceive what's getting in the way? And, you know, for a lot of people, answering that is a really helpful thing. The same for all of us too. What is the obstacle for me meeting my dreams? Tell me more about your girlfriend. Tell me more about your family. Tell me more about your neighborhood, your house, your bedroom. Tell me more about how you decorate. All of these are things that really help somebody give more depth to just answering. So you might ask, you know, how do you feel about your support staff? Tell me more about that support Amy that you really like. You know, we want to ask a little bit more. What does Amy do well? What will help you? So if somebody says, I'm not doing the things that I want to do, what will help you? Better transportation is one we hear a lot, right? We might also hear more staffing. That's a big one that we hear too. But we want to ask people, what do they think will help them reach those goals? What have you done already? We know within our field that's incredibly important. We know that something might have been done already that didn't work. We also know that today's a different day and we might want to try something that was done already again because people change. What else? What else do you want to tell me? I know that when I'm in an interview, I don't end that personal outcome measure conversation without asking, is there anything else I didn't touch on that you want to talk about? Because sometimes you might miss something really big. Like they are obsessed with building model airplanes, which was something I learned in an interview when I asked about what else. What do you want? That's a really simple question with really complex answers. If I asked any of you what you wanted out of your life, it is varied, and we all have a different version of what we want in our lives. What outcome or goal do you want? And not just those goals that are written into person-centered plans, but those goals and outcomes that we all have for ourselves, we know those goals can be short-term and long-term. They can be small and they can be big. What do you think will work? That is incredibly important to ask the person. What do you think will work for support? And what's your plan? What are your next steps? What will you do and when will you do that? And how are we going to know if that works? So these are all ways that you can ask these questions, not only in personal outcome measure interviews, but in planning meetings and other things that you're talking with the person, because they are incredibly helpful when you're looking at ways to have better, successful interviews. So we have a couple of tips for success with this, with the art of listening, to always come back to. We've been giving you a lot of tips prior to this, but the first thing is look to the person for direction. That is key. The person is going to be helping form the way that conversation is going. They're going to help direct it. You know, when they have that light up moment when you're talking about their family, that's a great way to have a direction and conversation about that. When the person is uncomfortable about something, and you can tell not only by their verbal, but their nonverbal communication, right? Like how somebody is responding with their body language is incredibly important. Wait for somebody's responses. We said that before. I almost need that reminder all the time because I want to jump in and ask another question, and it's my nature, when really we want to wait for that response. Ask one question at a time. If you need to reword the question, wait. Make sure that, you know, the way you worded it first, you're giving somebody an opportunity to answer, but you may need to reword it because we don't always use the same words to describe things. Always summarize to see if you got it right. One of the things that I really like to do is summarize that outcome to a person before I move on. You know, you talked a lot about participating in your community. And you told me about how you like to go thrifting, and then you love to do this on Tuesdays, and you go and play bingo at the Senior Citizen Center on Fridays, and you go out on Saturdays. Is there anything else that you do that I didn't bring up? Because you're really asking, am I getting this right? Did I summarize what we talked about right? That is a really good way to walk out of the interview knowing that you got the information that you needed to really make decisions about that conversation. Spend time with the person where they live, work, and play. That is incredibly important when we're looking at people who communicate in ways that are different than your own. If people are communicating in different ways, if you go to their home to do a personal outcome measure conversation, you're going to get a lot more depth than if you went and did it in an office at a provider. You know, the depth that you receive from that is incredibly important, to spend time where people are actually living their lives. And I'm talking to a group of people who always do that, right? We're always spending time with people where they're living their lives, but it is important to also put the personal outcome measures there. But use things in the pictures home as a guide. So I bring up this example because it was one of the best personal outcome measure conversations I ever had. But I had it with this gentleman who was in his mid-40s, and he probably communicated with about 15 words. 15 to 20, communicated very much with gestures and with his facial expressions. And I had the pleasure of doing his personal outcome measure conversation at his home. That was so helpful for me because I could actually walk up and go, oh, that's a picture at the Pacers game. Who are you with in this picture? Do you like the Pacers? Looking around, oh, the Colts are, oh, I'm from Indiana, if you can't tell. But the Colts are all over somebody's wall. Oh, have you gone to a Colts game? Would you want to go to a Colts game? And then you're looking at pictures of family members and people who are important to somebody. The depth from that conversation I received, it is impossible to receive that if I was not in that person's home. That's not always true. We want the person to choose where that interview is. But also for people, it can be incredibly important to learn about those things and be able to look at pictures like that. All right, Michael.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, observations, such an important part of these conversations. So let's go back to the Q&A box. Clearly, we got a lot of experience in this group, so really interested in your suggestions here. What might you see or observe in someone's home that could tell you about the presence or their definition of an outcome? So, what might you be able to observe? Give everybody a second here to start typing. Okay, great. So, pictures and decor, staff behavior, yep, for sure. Drawings, awards, their reaction to other people, family photos, DVD and CD collections, trophies, smells, absolutely. Let's see, souvenirs, interactions, certificates of achievement, personal items, body language with housemates, pieces of art, setup, cleanliness, privacy. Wow, these are really good. Important things they own. Do they have their own room? Do they have private space to lock up belongings? Unsafe environments, wall hangings. These are good. Pets, cleanliness, accessibility, very good. Locks on doors and cabinets, for sure. Yep, cleanliness, layout of the home, types of food, good one. Adaptive equipment, designated work areas, yep, so staff offices, wow, lists, data lists, personal information. Wow, I think we might have covered all of the outcomes there. That is really, really impressive. Nice job. Okay, great. Technology, yep, very good. Communication changes, nice. Okay. Wow, really great. Yeah. So, yeah, lots of richness, right, by making those observations. And it is really important to remember that no matter how people communicate, um, our observations often provide us with a significant amount of information regarding people's outcomes. So, as you all mentioned, right? So we can see family photos on the wall. Does the person have access to technology? Are they able to use their environments? Are those environments accessible? What do we smell? Are there cookies baking? Is dinner in the oven? What do we see in that environment, right? What do we hear? So this really is going to start as soon as we pull into somebody's driveway or walk up to their door, right? Is their home like those in the neighborhood? Is it similar to other homes, right? When we entered the home, so when we rang the doorbell or knocked on the door, who opened the door? Was it the person? Was it a staff member? When we walk in, if we close our eyes, how do we feel, right? How does that place make you feel? Do we smell anything? Again, are there cookies baking? Is it pleasant? What are we hearing? Is it chaotic? Is there nice soft jazz music playing? I don't know if that's your thing, but maybe it's the person's thing, right? Is it a pleasant environment? Photographs. We mentioned trophies, awards. What types of interactions are we seeing in that environment? Are people laughing, right? Is it eerily quiet? Is the place too sterile? So we mentioned cleanliness, but is it too clean, right? Because sometimes that's the sign that it doesn't feel very homey or too well lived in. It's just sterile, right? So lots of great observations, and they really do tell us about people's outcomes. How are those outcomes defined? Are those outcomes present? It really does tell us a lot. And oftentimes we're going to use that as a conversation starter, right? So the family photos, who's in the photos, right? Oh, that's your family. Well, how often do you get to see them, right? And that might be where we start that conversation, is talking about some of the things that we see in that person's environment, right? Because one of the goals as an interviewer, as someone who's trying to have a conversation with another person, we need to establish that rapport, right? And those observations are going to help us to do that as well.
Okay, thank you, Michael. So let's talk about using the personal outcome measures with people who communicate differently. That's the main part of what we're talking about with everyone communicating. So with that, preparation is key. As Michael said at the beginning, it is really important that you are finding a whole bunch of different ways with communication for somebody. So part of that is preparing to know exactly how the person communicates best. So how does the person communicate? Is the person, do they prefer to communicate using their iPad, even though they may communicate verbally to their staff? I've had an interview with somebody who preferred to do it that way. Is the person preferring to communicate in a different way? Will they need or have they requested support during the interview with an interpreter or somebody present to help? Somebody may request that or want a support there to feel more comfortable or to communicate to the person conducting that interview. So do they need that interpreter? Does that person use a device? Is the device available to them for the interview? Is it charged? Is it ready to go so that the person can utilize it? Do you need to learn more about the person's modes of communication prior to doing that conversation? That is really, really important. There's sometimes you need to spend time with somebody to really understand how that person communicates before you jump into a personal outcome measure conversation. I know that there have been times where spending 30 minutes of just conversing with somebody, not specifically about personal outcome measures, has made my communication during that conversation a ton better. Talk to the people who know the person best to get advice. How does this person prefer to communicate? Are there resources or things I can bring that would be helpful? Is there anything that you do while you're on SIF or while you're living with the person to help communicate better? You really want to get all of that best advice from people who know the person so that you can be prepared to really have an interview that is going to bring up things that the person wants and desires, and we can really understand that communication. The next area is when you're looking at considerations for if a support person or interpreter is present during the interview. So this is really key because we want to make sure that even if there is an interpreter or a support person, that we're addressing all of the questions and giving our full attention to the person being interviewed. If you've ever done any type of communication with somebody who's using a sign language interpreter, you are communicating to the person. The sign language interpreter is there to be an aid in communication. That is it. So I'm really talking directly to the person. Coach the interpreter to answer with what the person would express, not what they think. That is really important because you will have people who are in an interview as a support person or an interpreter who start giving their own version of what the person wants for their life. And when we're looking at personal outcome measures, that's not a personal outcome. So we really want to make sure that we let the interpreter know, we want to know what the person would say. Even if you disagree with that, we would want you to let us know what the person is expressing and saying. Ensure that the conversation with someone who knows the person best is different than the support person or interpreter you had during that initial personal outcome measure conversation with the person. This is key. We can't have the same person in the room as that follow-up, the person who knows them best, because then you're not really knowing for sure if that person is receiving the support to meet their personal outcomes. Because that person may say, oh, they brought it up in the interview, so now I'm going to bring it up when I'm in that support conversation. One of the things that has been really effective for many people, and especially because now we all have, this device really close to us at any time, is using pictures. If you're at a person's home, you might have them show pictures of their life. But you can also pull up images on your phone or computer or something else just so that you can get some better information. Maybe you bring up a word, maybe you say fire extinguisher, and the person's confused. about that term. So instead you bring up a picture of it and ask if they have it in their house. Where might it be in your home? That's a really easy way to help communicate with those aids that are just so easy. It's so close to us that we'd be able to pull up a picture. Utilize pictures to communicate about those concepts. Again, you may find really good pictures. I've seen some people do a short video, really just to show those concepts to somebody. Show images to reinforce questions and increase understanding. I have seen people in a personal outcome measure interview actually pull up a picture of the exact Walmart that they go to, right? Because that's the one that they like to go to. But it wasn't just Walmart. They really liked to show all the pictures because they were very visual about how they chose things throughout their day. And so they also wanted pictures of staff and their family members and a lot of other things going on. And that was really helpful when I was doing a personal outcome measure conversation. Again, talk directly with the person. Include the person, even if someone else is providing the information. We will repeat that because it is key. Use the person's preferred mode of communication. Again, I conducted an interview with a person who could communicate verbally. They decided to use an assistive device for communication because they preferred that. It made the conversation a little bit longer. I also got much more than I would have received if we had not used the preferred mode of communication. Offer breaks, notice body language. I did an interview with somebody where he really loved music, and part of the break were playing their favorite songs, and we would dance a little bit, and then we moved back to having questions because he really wanted to move and not be in one place. Be conversational and make sure you take the time needed. The person's comfort is key. If the person is uncomfortable, you're not going to get good information. And taking notes is incredibly important when you make decisions later. You're not going to remember the whole conversation. That's a lot to remember. We want you to connect by making eye contact. Slowing down. That's something I have to tell myself to do even now, right? I have to slow down. Use short sentences or common words. Using gestures are really important because if we're not using gestures, I use gestures all the time, but a lot of people, that's how they best communicate. Right back and forth. That can really be helpful for people, and some people prefer that. Watch their body language and cues, and ask yes and no questions when you're connecting, and really that's summarizing, right? We want to summarize with those yes and no questions. Those visual objects and cues, like we talked about, objects, pictures, photos, videos, artwork, drawing. I remember seeing somebody who was really into the Lego Technic sets, which are pretty hard to put together. And they showed me all of the cars that they had made with them. It was really cool because they also loved to build other things. And that was actually a part of their job, was building too. So it's just seeing all of those visual cues to really strike up that conversation. Sometimes to promote understanding, you may want to give a large print of the list of personal outcome measures, and that isn't available. We also want to provide options for reading, listening, and explanation. So for some people, they might want to read each one of those outcomes. They may want to read some of the questions that you may be asking. They really want time to listen and have that explanation. Time and patience is incredibly important. You know, don't always think it's going to happen where you get it done in an hour and a half. I remember doing a personal outcome measure interview that took 5 hours with a person at a person's home. And it was in my top 3 favorite interviews I've ever been able to do because I learned so much. Active listening, like we talked about, is just key. So those general tips for success, all of your usual techniques still apply, right? Anything you learn in that personal outcome measure training, all of those usual techniques that you use for communication, those still apply. You communicate with people all the time, still use those. Trial and error, that's true of anybody you're communicating with. We want to see what works and what might not work. If we can't determine the person's definition of the outcome, and those that know them best don't know that definition, then the outcome is an opportunity. And that's just really clearly there because we're not sure what that outcome is, and neither is the person who's supporting them. So how do we actually provide support for it? All right, I'm going to turn it over to Michael for some data.
Okay, so once again, lots of great data and research on our website. If you haven't seen that, please check it out. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but did want to give you a little bit of context. So we were able to slice and dice some personal outcome measures data, data collected from 2014 through 2022. This data set includes a total of 7,200 personal outcome measures conversations. And we were able to break it down by these different demographics, different communication modes, and explore that a little bit. So again, we're just going to touch on this briefly. So for people choose where and with whom to live, there we go. So again, like Rebecca said, if we cannot determine a person's definition of the outcome, then it's not going to be present. And sometimes it can be more challenging to do that with people who communicate in ways other than verbal and spoken language. So we do find that for people who are who use forms of communication other than verbal spoken language, such as facial and body expressions, they are 1.7 times less likely to choose where and with whom to live than people who primarily communicate through verbal and spoken language. And that is similar to choose where to work, 1.5 times less likely to choose where to work. That is also true with choose personal goals. So people who use facial and body expressions to communicate are 1.5 times less likely to choose personal goals than people who primarily communicate through verbal and spoken language. Okay, and so realized goals, pretty similar here. This is 1.8 times less likely. So again, you know, a little bit of data for you to look at, and just kind of showing that, you know, when we don't understand those definitions of the outcomes are not present, and sometimes it can be a little bit more challenging to get that. But again, we have lots of tools that we can use now to try to understand that better. So people who don't communicate with verbal and spoken language, so some of the differences there, and this is looking at the supports. So some of the highest supports for people who have modes of communication other than verbal and spoken language, highest are safety, health, and using environments, and some of the least present supports for people who communicate in ways other than verbal spoken language. People choose where and with whom to live, people choose where to work, and people perform different social roles. So again, not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. Please check out our website for lots more data and research.
Michael. All right, so we're just gonna wrap up a little bit with some suggestions and then show some resources. So here are some suggestions from the certified interviewers about how to communicate with people. Utilize enabling technology, including the apps that people already have access to on their phone or personal device. So if somebody is using a specific app, like maybe they're using the American Sign Language app all the time with their staff, that might be something that you use while you're in the personal outcome measure interview. It's already something comfortable for them. You're using that technology. Use emojis or scales of 1 to 10. That can really help gauge an idea of how much a person may care about a certain issue, how important that may be. Maybe you're rating your staff of how much you like them, but these scales can really be very helpful in understanding what's important to people. Draw pictures together. I saw on one of these, what does write back and forth mean? That's the thing where you're writing down. Maybe I write down, what do you love to do? And the person draws pictures back. Or maybe they actually write, I love to do X, like I love to go shopping, I love to go to McDonald's, and I really love to go to movies. So it might be something where we're really specific. Have the interpreter answer in the first person. Make sure that the interpreter is talking in first person for the person. So if you ask the person, what do you like to do? The interpreter is going to say, I like to do this, because they are interpreting for that person. consider developing a communication toolkit that you use and others in your organizations may use. Have resources that support you to have your conversations be more successful. We've seen a ton of organizations create really cool things to be able to have toolkits and resources. But building your own is incredibly important because you have preferred modes of communication and you have ways you communicate better too. So even building your own toolkit is just so helpful. A couple of things with our personal outcome measures is we do have a couple of upcoming training and workshops that you can attend. So you can see that here on our website. You just got a link in the chat box, but these can really give you a lot more information and depth about the personal outcome measures if you have not been through these trainings and workshops. I highly recommend them. Really, it changes the way that you view support, but it also helps make sure that you're asking the right questions, that you're really focusing on the process. All right, you can also sign up for CQL emails. So we have a capstone that gets sent out and we would love to send that to you because these resources are fantastic. And I cannot stress that enough. If you're looking for ways to communicate, if you're looking for ways to explain or trainings or looking at how organizations across the country might do things well, this is really a great way to learn more about that. So go to our website and you can do click on that link and sign up for our newsletters. We also have a ton of social media, just like a lot of organizations, but you can follow us on Facebook. You can also find us on Twitter at the CQL. You can see that we have a YouTube channel that has a ton of trainings. That's where we upload webinars to when they're finished. And then we have a LinkedIn as well that you can go to. And of course, our website, cql.org. So we're going to take a look at some of the questions.
Yeah, and we actually have a lot of really great suggestions that have come into the Q&A box. So I'll read a few of those. Maggie suggests to keep myself from taking over a conversation, I think wait. And that's wait is an acronym, apparently. I didn't know that. Why am I talking? Is there a why behind what I am saying, or am I filling space? As a talker, this has helped me a lot, and I wanted to share in case it helps anyone else. Yeah, thanks for that, Maggie. Cool acronym there. And Allison suggests, ask yourself, are you listening or waiting to talk? And we have two Allisons, apparently. The other Allison said, we may have more, actually, but another Allison says that we made the comment about eye contact. However, I've begun to start a conversation asking if eye contact makes the person feel comfortable or not. People with autism sometimes struggle with nonverbal communication like eye contact, and it can be distracting. Yeah, Allison, I think that's a great point. And, always trying your best to understand what people's preferences are in terms of communication, I think is a really great idea. So thank you for that. And then Rebecca, I'll throw this question out to you from Noel. For those who do not use words to speak, do people use a proxy in addition to the support interview?
Yeah, so that's when we talk about the interpreter who's present. Interpretation is not just something that people who need sign language have. When you have somebody who is truly interpreting that communication from the person, it could be a support staff like a DSP who knows them really well. Could be a sister, a mom, a family member who is really interpreting what the person is saying during that interview with the person supported and relaying it back to you as an interviewer. So that proxy is your interpreter. Now, sometimes we know we have to tell that person that we want you to interpret what the person wants, not what you think. That's incredibly important. But again, that is really helpful to bring somebody who knows someone well, as long as they're comfortable and want that to happen. Some people want the conversation alone, and you just might not get as much as if a proxy was there too. I don't like always using the word proxy just because a proxy is replacement of a person when this is an interpreter with the person. So that's why it's important to have that. And then on that person who knows them best, that's a completely separate interview. That's a completely separate conversation from the interpreter that's there with you.
Nicole had a great suggestion of a way to replace it. Instead of saying that somebody is having a behavior, she suggests expressing without words. So thanks for that, Nicole. That's really cool. Okay, so I think that is all the questions we have, and it looks like we're right on time here. So Seth, any final thoughts?
No, other than to thank everyone for joining us today. Obviously, a lot of content to cover today, a lot of interest. We always appreciate all the engagement from attendees in the Q&A box, all the great tips and suggestions. So we do really appreciate that. And also, of course, thanks to our presenters today, Michael and Rebecca, for all that great information you shared. Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.